When I look at and analyze the aspects of the human being that, from where I sit, appear to be intentional deficiencies, flaws, or things that were intentionally shut off within us, combined with several inherent vulnerabilities, the sheer amount of things about the human being that are limiting or manipulatable or programmable or other types of things that are generally negative it's uncanny. And because of the sheer amount of them and the way in which they affect us, it would appear to me that these things were designed intentionally, imposed upon us intentionally, turned off in us intentionally to limit us. I personally believe that it's because we were designed to be a slave race. We were designed so that we don't live very long. It's very interesting when you really start to look at things and not just accept what you've been told. Now, I'm going to give you a list of things that if you were to write them down and look at them, and then just listen to the cursory explanations or examples of how these things profoundly limit the human or make us incredibly vulnerable because they're aspects or attributes that are so exposed and unprotected. And also keep in mind, when men who know these things about you, about all of us, that have ill intentions, lots of power, money, and ability to get things done, they can have an absolute field day with you. And I'm going to keep the context of how these I'm going to keep the context of this in how these things about us are manipulated and manipulatable by our own kind. This is not even going to really touch on, other than right here I'm going to briefly mention it, the fact that these aspects of us can be profoundly manipulated by forces from beyond. And when you contemplate the fact of how unaware we are of those types of manipulations that absolutely affect us from forces from beyond, man, it really just begins to solidify a picture that shows most of what we think we know about ourselves, most of what we think we are, has all just been stuff we've been telling ourselves. It's all been feel-good stuff that people have been coming up with to try to make heads or tails of what we are, why we're here, to try to make light of it. But I tell you, and I mean this, when you really start looking into this, when you really start looking at the nuts and bolts of the equations that govern us, that make us up, that are manipulatable within us, because these equations can receive input, so the output, the outcome of working the equation can vary. And when there are people that know more than you that can, how do I say this, do things in such a way that limit what you think, what you know, what you believe, limit your knowledge, confine your perception into a box, at that point, you really are, even though you're not cattle, you can be and are treated and looked upon as nothing more than cattle. We are extracted from. And a lot of the ways that we're extracted from are by wicked men who capitalize on these aspects of us, ensure in as much as they can that we remain ignorant to these aspects of us, so that we cannot defend ourselves, protect ourselves, and remain as ignorant as lab mice as to what's being done to us. Now, on to the things that are the quote-unquote equations that make us up. Whatever designed us, and I do not think it was this thing called God. I really think we were engineered by a species of other beings that decided to use us for a slave race, engineered us to live very short lives, engineered us with a lot of genetic defects, and turned a lot of aspects of us off. The mind is compartmentalized. And if you know anything about it, we use 5% of the conscious mind runs 5% of the show. That's where analysis and thinking and things of that nature take place. And it's where the filters are. It's where the awareness is. The subconscious mind runs 95% of the show. And by and large, whatever I can get into the subconscious mind will be with you for most or all of your life. And there are men that have worked diligently to understand the techniques and strategies by which they can bypass the subconscious mind and get their ideas and influences into your subconscious minds. And what this paints a picture of is that we're easily manipulatable because we're unaware of this. We're unaware of the aspects of us as far as developmental and the levels of programming that go on or that need to go on in a healthy human environment. When you have wicked men that understand this and want to capitalize on it, they take advantage of this developmental aspect of us and implant our minds with their ideas and put seeds into our minds that ultimately disempower us and do all kinds of other things. This part of us, this central focus of the human experience is the mind, and we don't have direct control over what goes into the mind, the subconscious mind, while we're in that developmental stage to a large degree. That's the only protector of that is largely our parents. And in the world we live in today, our parents are oblivious of this stuff. And despite what efforts aware parents put into protecting the minds of their child and what goes into it, the world and society that we have seen cultivated all around us is so toxic that inevitably something or many things are going to get through the veil that the parents have put around the child's mind to protect the child's mind while it's developing so that it can develop into a healthy and balanced being that has an accurate or fairly centered perception of the world in which it lives. So there's the aspect of the mind. Number one, compartmentalized, conscious, subconscious, no access to the subconscious. Other people can program and do program the subconscious, no direct access to get in there and remove the things of the subconscious. This seems pretty limited. This seems pretty disempowering for the human when, for such a long time, to such a large degree, in these developmental stages of the human life, of the human being, there's all kinds of thought parasites, fear parasites, and just maliciously planted things that go into the mind that are malignant or will grow into malignancies. So I could really dive deeply into that whole topic of our minds and what men have done to it or are doing to it. But that's a different video or a different topic for a different time. I've done videos on this where I've scratched the surface of these things on some levels. So another aspect of us where things have been limited, turned off, inhibited within us is that the inward journey is firewalled off. There's a reason why most people on the planet don't have an inward journey or a meditative process as a practice. I would suggest to you that if it was easy to do or even mildly challenging to do, moderately challenging to do up even, that if people could see that there was something there, if people had glimpses of breaking through, that they would probably continue to do it knowing that there's more to the journey. We don't see that on this planet because by and large, for most people, the inward journey has been firewalled off. Could you meditate and get calm? Sure. Can you meditate and get kind of centered in your energy? Sure. But breaking through the veil and quote-unquote going inward and finding all of the answers and tapping into source and all that other stuff, as at least we've been led to believe this process brings us, that's been firewalled off. The human only uses 10 to 12% of its brain capacity, and I guess you could say up to 20% of its brain capacity at the highest levels of human intelligence. Something did that to us on purpose. There's DNA within the human that's shut off, and modern medicine calls it junk DNA. Modern science thinks it's junk DNA and that it's all bullshit. Well, I think it's been turned off. I think that our engineers used aspects of their genetic code to develop us further, to give us more capabilities than we would have otherwise had as the race of whatever kind of beings we were. They had to use aspects of their own genetic code to increase our intelligence or something. So rather than slice and dice DNA and get it all put back together the right way, it's kind of challenging to do that, even probably for them. I think it's easier, especially with their knowledge, to turn it off. It's probably neater. It's probably a lot more neat in its effect. And yeah, it's just been turned off, and modern science hasn't been able to figure out how to turn it back on. We have so the brain's firewalled off, DNA is shut off, the inward journey shut off. We have relatively bad memories as a species because, we forget much through the course of a lifetime. And things like photographic memories, while that seems possible, we get a glimpse of what we're capable of, what we have the potential for, but it's been shut off. And when and where we see it, it's generally an anomaly. Long periods of deep thinking, deep analysis, or long periods of feeling, deep emotional feelings, heavy feelings, this stuff is extremely draining on the human being. It's draining on the brain, it's draining on the body, and you can take a serious power nap after engaging in prolonged periods of deep thinking, analyzing, or feeling something. Combine the three of those with an emotional charge, or thinking and analyzing with an emotional charge, and oh boy, does that drain the human being. We deplete very quickly. That was by design. There's a reason why most people don't engage in long periods of deep thinking and analyzation or analyzing and things of that nature, because it is extremely draining, and that's, like I said, that's why people don't do it and won't do it. So another aspect of us, we're psychologically based beings, mind-based beings. So if you can screw up the psychology of the human being, if you can knock the psychology off of center, off of balance by way of traumas while the child is, or while the human is developing, or psychological damage by way of, well, just all kinds of things that can be done in days of old and current days that can be as damaging or more damaging to the human being as physical injury or trauma to the body. You know, if you mess up or mess with the mind of a developing child or a teen or even early adult, you can completely and utterly change the outcome of that person's experience in life, their perceptions, their mindsets, and you can do that in an extremely unhealthy way. That's an aspect of us that's incredibly vulnerable to wicked men with malicious intentions that desire for you to be slave-minded. And the fact that we have so little of an innate mechanism to get back to center. I mean, we have some mechanisms to depressurize. Even, the human can cry under periods of intense stress. You know, we in our society think that's what chicks do, but for the human, if you're, functioning right, even as a guy, that's something to depressurize, I suppose, to get some of the stress out of you. The energy of it out of you, so that it doesn't kill you. But getting back to center, being a balanced being, becoming a balanced being again, when you psychologically traumatize or damage the human, that can be virtually impossible. And when you do that stuff to the developing child, and I would suggest to you that there's been an all-out assault on the developing children for a long time. And this is aside from the toxicity of families and what they do to their own kids that damages their minds profoundly from traumas. I'm talking about what society knows about these aspects of us and has placed landmines all around to get things into the mind that traumatize, limit, restrict, make the perspective myopic of the developing human being, so they never develop into their full potential. We don't have any inherent protection mechanism for the mind. There is no inherent fortification of this aspect of us that essentially is where the center of the core, or the core of the human experience, exists. The very thing in which the human interprets the world, what's real, what's possible, and more, that's one of the most vulnerable aspects of us. We're also emotional beings. So think about this. We're intelligent, sentient beings, but then we also have these emotions. And when you look at it and actually think about, as trivial as it may sound, the line in the Matrix where the architect says to Neo, you're experiencing the chemical precursor of an emotion that is designed to disrupt logic and reason. In order for us to be relatively balanced, we've got to really apply a lot of logic and reason. In order for us to not do stupid things that hurt or damage us, we have to apply logic and reason. And when you've been in periods of being blissfully in love, tell me you've never done something stupid or that you would never otherwise do. When you've been in periods of extreme anger or rage or emotionally charged in those types of ways, tell me you haven't done or said things that you wouldn't otherwise do. We have this Achilles heel. We have a lot of Achilles heels in us, but one of the bigger ones is emotions. And when I can manipulate your emotions, that affects your psychology. When I manipulate your emotions long enough, that conditions your psychology. When I condition your psychology, I kind of force you or condition you into a place where you're running yourself in circles. You're constantly emitting negative chemicals in the brain that keep you in a low fear-based or negative state. If I can manipulate your emotions, I can easily manipulate the most vulnerable aspects of you. I can drive you. I can influence you. And these are the types of things that wicked men who have ungodly amounts of resources available to them to influence you on these things and do these things to you, they know about this stuff. They capitalize on this stuff. So the human being, unfortunately, is pretty fragile. The fragility of the human psyche is why it's been attacked for thousands of years, I suppose. Why mind control tactics have been used and work so damn well. Why fear tactics work and are used as much as they do and work so well. Because the human being is pretty psychologically fragile, especially when it's ignorant. When it's not ignorant, the human being is a very different species. Our perception changes, our awareness broadens, and the entire playing field for the human experience changes profoundly when we have knowledge. Now, think about the power elite on this planet, the bloodlines on this planet. They keep the knowledge for themselves. The scraps that we get to such a large degree have been bastardized and perverted in such a way that they never really do anything to empower us. Show me a time in history where human beings have been empowered in such a way because of their knowledge and the fact that we were all just functioning well together as a species, living in blissful harmony, singing songs of joyous, harmony. It's just never been that way. I suggest to you that there are reasons for that most people never contemplate. There are actual reasons for that are so far from what people are wanting or willing to accept that they'll never actually know the truth. When you start looking at the sheer amount of aspects of us that are vulnerable, exposed, weak, unfortified, that we are ignorant of, it is amazing that we have such high views of this quote-unquote God that created us. Because the deficiencies and the flaws in us are so obvious, so grotesque, because of the way that we are unaware of the vulnerabilities that exist in us relevant to them, how easily manipulatable we are because of them, how easy it is to manipulate the human being into a low negative fear-based type place where the human is emitting lots of energy. That ties into the part that I said I wasn't going to talk about, where the forces from beyond are stimulating us and feeding upon the energy that we're emitting in these states and using people on this planet to perpetuate cycles of violence and death and destruction and war and lack and famine and all that stuff, so that we are continuously stimulated into this low negative fear-based state. Think about that. It really does lend itself to the fact that we were designed to be a source of food. We were designed to be slaves and designed to be a source of food, because there are so many aspects of us, attributes, equations that are manipulatable, vulnerable, that we're ignorant to, that, as I said, are not protected, aren't fortified, we have no inherent awareness of, and probably 3 or 4 things I'm not even thinking about. And there's probably 3 or 4 aspects of us that are inherently vulnerable and grotesquely manipulatable that I haven't thought about here. But when you look at this, write it down, look at it, use your own critically thinking mind as an intelligent human being that has walked on this planet for however many years you've been alive, and come up with reasons why all of these equations exist in us that are not for nefarious intentions. Imagine why these things would have been engineered into us if it weren't to purposefully limit us. If we weren't meant to be fed upon, why are we energy electrical based beings that emit energy, that feel emotions, that the emotions stimulate energies that flow through us, that emit out of us, that the psychology is so fragile that when you start tying all of this together and you start looking at it from a perspective that you have not before, and just let yourself contemplate that you were designed this way for a reason and that it wasn't out of love, that men with nefarious intentions are acutely aware of all these things and have been doing everything they can to capitalize on, manipulate you, pervert your mind, pervert your perceptions, limit you, have you stuck in fear, have you disempowered, have you on your knees. Do you see what I'm saying here, folks? Does anybody see the picture that's forming as I'm explaining all of this, even though I'm probably missing a lot of the details? And I'm not even necessarily as concise as I could be, but there's a lot to say about some of this stuff. And it all ties together. It all ties together, and because it all ties together, it makes it even easy to repeat yourself regarding certain points and topics, because all of this stuff ties together like a big web or like a big net. Think about what I'm saying. Write this stuff down. Look at it. Contemplate why. Come up with reasons that I have not about why these attributes, aspects, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, etc., are a part of us if we were created by a loving, benevolent creator deity. Oh, also, if you believe in reincarnation, you lived another life, but you don't remember a damn thing from it. You are wiped.
You are disempowered, and you have every disadvantage that could possibly be imposed on you for the most part, because even in that quote-unquote foofy stuff about reincarnation or recycling, either way, if you lived another life, when you die, whatever it is that's out there that does this stuff to us, that's engineered us, that's created these things, or that manipulates us, has a way of recycling us back in, wiping our minds so that we have no knowledge of whatever we experienced in the last life. We have no memory of whatever we may have learned. We have nothing. I mean, think about that. I'm hard-pressed to come up with any other logical example or logical explanations as to why these equations exist within the human, why we're so ignorant to them, why they're so vulnerable, why they're so easily capitalized upon, why we're so easily manipulatable, why we have this emotional, psychological body that can be so easily manipulatable that can knock the entire life experience of the human being completely off kilter. Think about that for a second. And ask yourself how much this quote-unquote God that creates you really loves you for anything other than a source of food. There are all these equations in you that are designed to squeeze you. There are all these equations in you that you are ignorant to that can knock you so far off center it's not even funny. And if you're real with yourself and you look at the world, most people aren't centered. Monks and yogis and gurus disassociate. I can't even speak right now. I can't do it again. Disassociate. There you go. Say it again. They disassociate themselves from society so that they can focus on their minds and find anything that resembles being centered in this world. I think they recognize the fact that we are energy-based beings and that something else is feeding off of us, that society and the powers that be on this planet have been manipulating us and squeezing us into this negative fear-based state because of all of these equations they're aware of, and that forces from beyond have been stimulating humanity and capitalizing on these equations that they're either aware of because they're just obvious, or they engineered into us and then they've been capitalizing on us. I kind of subscribe to the philosophy that what we consider to be God may very well have been what created this stuff into us because it designed us to be a source of food. There's a few scenarios that seem to fit reasonably well. The whole concept of being genetically modified to be a slave race fits as well, but that doesn't tie into the whole we were designed to be a source of food. There's a few things, in there that I'm not sure of, but when I look at all of these scenarios, some of this stuff just fits, or there's pieces of all of it that fit that I just haven't been able to separate and put it all together in a way that makes sense. But seriously, prove me wrong. Show me where my logic and reasoning with regards to identifying these things, calling them out for what they are, what men have been doing to them, what forces from beyond have been doing to them. And again, forces from beyond. You can say I'm weird because I'm talking about that, but if you believe in God and the devil, if you believe in Jesus and the Satan and all that other stuff, these are forces from beyond. So we can keep it contained to that myopic little Christian or religious box of, at least in that context, there's forces from beyond. Well, I subscribe to the fact that there's a lot of life out there in the universe, and it exists right here with us in the electromagnetic spectrum in which we live. It's just we are so limited that we don't have the perception of them. We cannot see them, hear them, or sense them. But interestingly enough, they can see, hear, sense, and mess with us. They have the ability to get into the frequency range in which our minds or our consciousness operates in. That's how and why they can plant ideas into our heads. That's how and why schizophrenics literally hear audible voices. That's how and why we have thoughts go through our head that we, if we think about them, are so horrible, it's abhorrent, and most of us will never admit this, but if we think about them, we can conclude relatively easily that these are not a part of us. There's reasons for all of this stuff. But nobody notices, nobody cares. Everybody's just more interested in the next gadget or gizmo or triviality in this world that can entertain them or occupy their mind in some way that keeps them from knowing the truth, keeps them from wanting to gain knowledge that helps them to better understand the world that they were born into, why it works the way it does, and understand the aspects of them that are so manipulatable so that they can become aware of this in as much as they need to begin to take action to protect these aspects of themselves, to shore up these aspects of themselves, if you will, to strengthen the mental muscles, to strengthen the emotional muscles, to strengthen these things within the psychology of the mind. I guess that's the mental muscles, to strengthen these things within us that are so grotesquely vulnerable, easily manipulatable, and so obviously capitalized on in most of the human species.